Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Ride of Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
Welcome back. Happy Monday to the first one in July. I hope you all had a fantastic 4th, safe one. Came back with all limbs and toes. Lisa Mitchell, wow. That is a blast from the past. It's awesome to see you. I hope North Carolina is treating you well. As we let folks join on in here, I'm going to do just a touch of banter on something that was announced on the 2nd. Ed, great to see you. Great to see you all out there. Let me share out my screen. And let's just chat a little bit about this. That on the 2nd, Judson, who's the CEO of Microsoft's commercial business. Now, Chris, just so you know, I don't know Judson, but that's how they call it.
That's a shocker.
Yeah. I know you're shocked that I don't know Judson, but I don't. But what was interesting, right, is that Microsoft announced a new company within their, obviously massive portfolio of companies, and this is called the Microsoft Frontier Company, and they invested $2.5 billion into this, including 600 industry engineering experts to co-design, innovate, deploy, etc. AI. Few things that I wanted to kind of chat with you all about is, first off, you can see it's very centric right now around enterprise, right? To the likes of Land O'Lakes, Unilever, Novo, and they are talking about the ecosystem, right, of partners like Accenture, Capgemini, KPMG, PwC. And so when you guys see this, let me just stop sharing here. And was I sharing, by the way?
You are not sharing.
No. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me start again, by the way. I just realized I clicked it but didn't share. Anyway, this is the article. I'll put it in for everybody to see. Right. So this article on the Microsoft Frontier Company, as I was just real quick reiterating, 2.5 billion investment, 6,000 people in this business unit, focused on some big names in their initial rollout with some big partners. So Chris, I'll start off with you. When you see that, first off, any thoughts? Obviously Microsoft, historically enterprise first. Mm-hmm. They are showing up at, and I'm very grateful, events like ours, Ride of Boom and others, saying MSP is really critical to their success as well. So 2-part question. A, what do you think about starting a business unit of this scale and size? And second, do you think it'll make its way down to us?
Yeah, it's just going to be interesting to start something with 6,000 people. That's some serious HR job fairs going on there. But first of all, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, Microsoft's got a lot of criticism about how they really haven't done much in AI. And just giving you an example, I think Copilot is probably hated on the most by people that actually leverage the technology. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were just going down this Copilot route. And I was like, believe it or not, if you find any companies actually using AI, they're probably not leveraging Copilot. So there's been a lot of criticism on them. There's been a lot of moves they've been making, kind of some behind the scenes, some in the news. So them going forward with this makes perfect sense from that perspective. So yeah, I mean, and I don't even remember the second part of your question. But,
do you think it'll make its way down to?
I do. I think it'll make its way down
to the world. They're obviously focused on, hey, we're not going to do all these deployments ourselves, right? PwC is going to do the big ones, Accenture is going to do them, etc. So do you think it'll make its way down to us?
Yeah, I think it'll take some time. It'll make its way down. I think it will be just like everything. I mean, I remember when I worked for the bank and all the all the benefits and stuff that I got with being a company of that size with Microsoft. I mean, you basically had an issue and it wasn't solved. It gets straight to the top. I mean, there's a lot of benefits they give the enterprise and mid-market that they don't trickle down. So I think it will trickle down, but it will be still kind of in the same way that it'll be watered down versus what you get out in the enterprise side.
Got it. How about you, Brian? Any reflection on this as you see this announcement?
Yeah, as Chris was sharing that, right? A Copilot license isn't a business outcome, right? And I think, when you look at Microsoft's Frontier announcement, the real news here isn't Microsoft investing billions of dollars, right? There's nothing new there. The real message, I think, is probably a little bit bigger than that. Is enterprise AI, right, is moving out of the experimentation, tire kicking phase and more into that, I'll call it execution phase, right? We've seen this the last couple of years where too many companies, too many organizations have confused AI activity with AI strategy, right? What Microsoft's, I think, telling us here is that enterprise AI doesn't become more valuable just because you bought a tool or a Copilot license, right? It has to be engineered into the business, right? That means like workflow redesign. And, I talk a lot about data governance and security architecture, accountability, change management, all those kinds of things, I think, is where you'll see measurable, return on investment.
Interesting. How about you, Phyllis? When you get knocks on the door about interest, help us with controls from some of the enterprises and stuff. What conversations come across your desk, and is this one of them? And any thoughts on this?
I mean, definitely people or organizations are asking us about, do we need special controls for AI? And our response is not yet. I mean, you see all the reports coming out around Mythos and all the things. It's like, stay the course. You still need essential cyber hygiene. You still, have to, implement good access control, MFA, so on and so forth. The velocity at which attacks are coming are quicker. And, we talked last week about the patch cycle being much faster and being burdensome to many, or a bigger burden to organizations. What's interesting, I just went to the AWS Summit here in DC last week, and of course it was all around AI and how AWS is going to support organizations with their AI needs. And so, I agree with everything Chris and Brian are saying, is that Microsoft's been a little bit behind the eight ball. I mean, no one, I agree with everything they say about Copilot. And so it'll be interesting to see how this goes. For sure, what we see enterprises are, like Brian says, they have more of a concrete or are definitely strategizing and implementing serious outcomes with AI. And the expectation is their workforce is leveraging AI to realize efficiencies and to create business outcomes. And, you're seeing that. I think the cloud service providers are realizing that. I just saw, did you see the news, like, I guess a couple of weeks ago where, like how memory and is becoming more expensive because of AI.
Oh, sure.
And so these manufacturers, it is like an arms race right now. And it's like, Apple says, oh, everything's going to be more expensive now. And it's, pass the price on to consumers. And so
RAM memory, the inflation in the DRAM space it's in the stratosphere.
Yeah, I've seen posts where like an MSP priced out something for a customer last year, like a server, and it was like $5,000 or $8,000, and now it's like $30,000.
Yeah,
it's purely because of that. Yeah, and then they have to go back to their customer and said, "Well, too bad you didn't pull the trigger last year."
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, Andrew, before we introduce you formally, maybe years ago you were mentioning you were an editor, publisher. I forget exactly the right nomenclature, but if you put that hat back on, you're still writing, right, in the tech, industry. When you see an announcement like this, what's the genre here? How do you take that announcement? Is it Microsoft hey, we have, we're just going to call it a new unit, take all these people from point A to point B. What do you think is the underlying story here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Microsoft is a huge company, and they've been trying to, as you mentioned, they've been trying to wedge Copilot into basically every product that they sell. And there's a ton of products and a ton of business units that are making those products. And for a company the size of Microsoft, it actually makes a lot of sense to just take the 100 people that are working in this division and the 150 people are working in that division, and just put them all under one umbrella and have it be a single AI focused team that crosses all of those product boundaries, that crosses all of the markets that they're trying to get into. So I actually think it makes a lot of sense for a company the size of Microsoft. Whether or not it actually improves Copilot or whatever AI products that they decide to make in the future is kind of up in the air. We'll see how that happens. But from a business perspective, just for Microsoft, it makes a lot of sense to just combine all that work into one group.
Yeah, that's really interesting the way you see that, Andrew. It makes a ton of sense. Thanks for sharing that. And Chris, I think we should start a new company and start building PCs out of our garage. I don't know if that would. No one's ever done that before with the price of DRAM and everything, right?
There's some crazy stuff. I wish I had some links, but there's some stuff that people are doing really creative with old hardware.
Yeah.
To run modern operating systems like Windows 11. Yeah, just to try to get a workaround around this thing, because it's going to get worse. I mean, it's going to get worse. There's a show that I watch, and they talked, and it's called The Agency. It's on Paramount. It's a pretty good show. But there's a quote in there. He says something. They're talking about rare earth metals, and that's what everybody's going at. They go, that's like oil's old news. It's the rare earth stuff that people care about, and so that's exactly what this is going to be for probably the rest of our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Think about all the hardware we just threw out willy-nilly because it's like, whatever. And it's like so precious. We're like, oh, no.
No way. Okay. It's like, your mom throwing out your baseball cards, right, Phyllis? Like, oh, no, don't do that. All right. So I'm going to put in a URL in chat. And I am thrilled. Always awesome to have first timers here on the Cyber Call. And Andrew Spike Brandt is just that. We'll introduce one moment, principal threat intelligence incident commander at Huntress. I was doing my weekly research, and I reached out to my good friend Andrew Kaiser, and I'm like, man, you guys published a fantastic article. This is really fascinating, Andrew, that, you're, and, another route, if you will, for, Microsoft compromise, and one in which, again, conditional access is at play, MFAs, invoked, and yet, this seemingly password, and I'm air quoting, I'm going to let Andrew be the expert here, but credential spray attack, nothing new, right, Phyllis? We've seen those before, but has been pretty damn successful. And so I really wanted to dig into this a little bit, because there's new terminology that we're going to talk about, and Andrew's going to share that these quote unquote hosting providers are also allowing blocks of IPs to be kind of rerouted, and it's just something really good, I think, research that Huntress did, and helping get this group shut down as well. So with that, Andrew Spike Brandt, welcome to the Cyber Call. Share a little bit about your background, what you do over there at Huntress.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be on the call, and greetings to the audience. So I'm Andrew Brandt. I joined Huntress about 3 months ago as an incident commander for the rapid response team. The team that I work within is called Adversary Tactics. We study threat actor behavior and then share that information with the world in ways that allow businesses and individuals to protect themselves better. My background is, as Andrew mentioned, is that I was, a long time ago, as an editor at PC World. I covered cybersecurity. I did that for about 10 years and realized that I got tired of waiting for the cybersecurity experts to come to me with stories. So I just decided to become a researcher myself, and have been doing that since 2008. And most recently, I've joined Huntress. So I'm doing that work, helping them to do research and also to publish, important news about cybersecurity incidents, like the one that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, you have your title is way better than probably it was back in the PC World days.
It's the longest title in cybersecurity by character count.
Chris is just jealous he's not a commander, right, Chris?
I know. I'm gonna add it. I have the power to add my own thing.
All right.
Title, so.
By the end of this, let's see that you're now the commander over it.
That's right.
Cyber. All right, Ms. Phyllis, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Welcome, Andrew, to the Cyber Call. So for folks who haven't seen the report yet, can you just give a brief, maybe one sentence overview of the attack and who is Lishi, however you pronounce that? And, this is the first I ever heard of this term. What is a BYOIP user? Or maybe even just what is BYOIP?
Yeah, so it's going to be hard to kind of condense this into one sentence, but I'll do the best I can to give you the elevator pitch. So Huntress has several customers. They were reporting compromises of their Microsoft accounts. We started to dig into it, and we discovered this basically password spray, which is, again, not a new technique. But it was hitting these Microsoft accounts that were set up with what they call resource owner password credentials, or ROPC. It's an older form of an OAuth command line credential entry that issues a credential token by just giving you, when you submit a username and password. It is an outdated and now deprecated method that OAuth recommends people move away from. It's actually been deprecated for 9 years. So we are talking something that is very old and very outdated. And it is essentially, it is a way to, it was a way for OAuth to issue credentials temporarily. Back in the day. It is no longer the accepted method because it does not support single sign-on. It does not support multi-factor authentication methods. It just issues the token. And companies and organizations that incorporate this ROPC OAuth 2.0 into their authentication mechanisms leave themselves open to these kind of attacks against weaker security mechanisms, like just a username and password. And it turned out that in this case, the attacks were originating from a small IP transit service provider. This is a company that provides services to owners of IP address blocks. And so this small person that was their customer came to them with an IP address block, used them to provide peering services so they could get on the internet with their IP address block. And then they started using that IP address block to start, pounding these addresses, sending out these credential slamming attacks against lots and lots of our customers.
Got it. Thank you for that. So, we talked about it's a credential spray. So 81 million login attempts in 14 days. So as a defender, what does it look like when you see this volume of credential attacks go across? Is it a wall of noise? Is it just the volume that makes it stand out? Like, how is it that, it stands out to you all?
Well, the main thing that stood out was that, like I said, credential spraying attacks happen persistently and consistently across the internet in a variety of different ways. I run honeypots here in my lab, and the honeypot is just nonstop getting slammed with credential spraying attacks from a bunch of automation and worms that are just trying to break into databases or various kinds of network access devices. What was distinctive about this one is that it targets Microsoft Entra, and that we saw high volume of these attempts that were being tried and successful. And that was the thing that stood out. The other piece of this that was very distinctive was that it started out with they would throw about 25 sample credentials at every account that was owned by every customer. And that started to ramp up to 40, 50, 70, 80 at a time. And so what that looks like in our logs is tons and tons of failed login attempts against a single user over a very short period of time, and then they move to the next user, and then they move to the next user, and it's the same, 60, 70 credentials that they're throwing at everybody's accounts. And the ones where they were successful, unfortunately, were accounts where the user had poor password hygiene. They had a password that may have been compromised, 5, 6 years ago, lost in a breach, and hadn't been changed because the customer thought that their MFA would protect them. And it just turned out that this combination of this type of authentication mechanism that doesn't rely on MFA or single sign-on allowed these threat actors to compromise their accounts.
Can I ask a quick question to you, Spike?
Please.
So I'm going to air quote AI, right? What role do you think this could have played? And let me be clear on my question. Like, you can obviously say to the prompt, hey, share with me deprecated, authentication methods or things of that nature that are still used. Like, do you think there's that kind of research being done by threat actors where they're looking for things that, are just like one-off type things that, okay, let's try this and see what happens?
Yes, and that is actually a great point. So threat actors do not have the limitations of needing to maintain operational functionality on networks. They can just experiment and throw anything at the wall to see if it sticks.
Right.
And this was another thing that they just tried to do, and they found that it was functional and it was able to, result in some positive outcomes for them, meaning that they were able to compromise several accounts. It turns out that, the Entra has this functionality called conditional access policies, and that this Azure CLI with these cap rules, several of the customers had configured them, but they had configured them, they thought they were protected by MFA, but they weren't because they had configured the policies slightly wrong. There was actually one company that had created one of these caps, and they called it Block Azure CLI, but it did not actually block Azure CLI. So they gave themselves sort of a false sense of security by naming it something that it couldn't do. And so part of the problem here is that there wasn't probably sufficient testing of these caps to make sure that they were effective at what they were trying to do. And then the other problem was that there were these, tenants that just continued to use these old, accounts that had old credentials, that had been compromised, and hadn't changed their passwords in,
Yeah,
in one case, 15 years.
What Spike, you just said is so important, right? This isn't, hey, all MSPs listening, go out and go sell more tools, right? It's go audit your conditional access policies you already sold to your client and prove they actually cover the Azure CLI and not just like the admin portal, for example. Like Spike.
Yeah, that's correct, Brian. We just want people to practice good security hygiene and do the right things.
So did you? I guess you got to talk to some of these victims. Then it sounds like, or how did you?
I did not personally, but we have our log collection capabilities in some of these environments, and so we were able to see some of these. We saw the spray attacks as a bunch of failures in a short period of time, and then we saw some of the successes as well. And we were able to look at things like the local time where the company is located, and the time when this compromise happened was out of business hours, and it was pretty obviously just wrong login or login from a strange location. They all happened to be login attempts from this same IPv6 address range that was being peered by Lishi. So that made it easy to figure it out. So eventually our detection engineering teams were able to come up with rules that basically looked for multiple failed login attempts as well as login attempts from this particular IPv6 address range that was doing bad stuff. And that revealed a whole lot more.
Phyllis, as we hand it back to you, I mean, is this like, when I think about something deprecated like this, I immediately start to think about OT and, so much of, SCADA systems that are so antiquated, but maybe even there is some type of, I'm drawing a blank on the term I want, but compensating control, Phyllis, sorry, compensating control there. But again, with the power of AI, I got to believe that this is something that people got to start considering. Like my one compensating control for my 1995 Windows machine supporting my entire manufacturing operation. I mean, the power of computing is going to give them some different options to crack that, is it not?
I mean, I believe so. And I think it's so important when you're listening to Andrew talk, it's like, okay, this was a deprecated service, right? And so you certainly should be able to look for services or versions of software that are no longer supported, right? And it's like, okay, a policy, a cap that didn't do what it actually said it was going to do. And so, these are the things that, perhaps we can automate on and, highlight at least to someone. Like if you look at OT, you could say, okay, did you know that you were running these outdated services? Did you know that all these things, were turned on, or, why? Right. And so, folks in OT often say, not to pick on folks in OT, I've never had to be responsible for those types of services, but we don't want to change anything because these are essential services that we owe, that we must provide to citizens, right? And in some instances, for sure, they are, they're life-threatening, or,
right.
People must have them. And so, but I think, with the advent of AI, hopefully, you can have these agents that do those automated checks that have, really been so difficult for SAs for decades, right? Like how many times do you go and you see a blue team or a red team and it's like, oh, decom, why is that still on? Or why is this not patched? So on and so forth. And so, it's just something hopefully that we can become better at.
Well, I think you're right, Phyllis. I mean, I was having a conversation Friday with Bob Miller, and we were kind of talking about, remediation and those types of things. And we used to have an MSP. He had an MSP, and these types of activities are things that have to be automated for the MSP to be successful. Because for an MSP, no matter how many clients they have, to sit down and go through manual steps,
right,
they're not getting paid to do that, right? And that's just the bottom line. I mean, their customers aren't going to pay them for all the hours that it takes to do this type of stuff. And I completely agree with Brian. And if you're going to do it, it needs to be audited, checked by, another set of eyes. But in reality, they're not getting paid for it. So you're right. There's got to be a way to solve this to where it's effective, but also cost effective for the MSP to do it, because they're just not going to get paid by their customers most of the time to do this.
Right. That's a good point. So Andrew, you talked about how you could see, a ton of credential spraying going on. Sometimes it was successful, sometimes it wasn't, oftentimes it wasn't. So we see the stat that only 78 accounts were compromised out of 81 million attempts, which, I mean, that seems pretty low. So why is it that anyone would be or should be worried about something where it seems like, oh, the success rate was pretty low?
Oh, I think the thing to be concerned about is the success rate being anything at all. These Entra accounts give access to corporate email. They give access to corporate resources. They could be an entry point for a threat actor to pivot into a network. And we also know that the cybercriminal sort of community has divided their roles. So there are threat actor groups that just do capturing of credentials from a variety of methods, whether it's phishing or spraying, and then they sell those onwards to other threat actor groups that perform hands-on keyboard attacks or actual network compromises that lead to ransomware and other kinds of attacks. And who knows what could happen 6 months down the road if you have a credential that's compromised in this way, and they don't use it right away, and you're unaware and don't have a policy to change your password. Maybe 6-8 months later, something bad happens with access that some other threat actor group bought from the first one that stole the password.
Right. It's not just a one for one. It could be like one to many, right? So
absolutely
important.
Once it's out there, it could be used for anything.
Right, exactly. And so someone asked about MFA in the chat, and you found 4 distinct ways that MFA failed here. And so can you tell us a little bit about each and which of the 4 you feel like you'd bet money on as sitting in the most client tenants right now? I do have one funny story, though. My husband, who does kind of like instant response supply chain for a big financial institution. He heard me saying, "Oh, well, they have to implement MFA," and then he was like, "It's not just implementation, Phyllis. It has to be enforced properly." So many, he said, and I was like, "Whatever," because he was saying, so many organizations, like, they say they implement MFA, and maybe it is, but is it really enforced?
Man, that's some romantic dialogue there.
I know.
That's what I was going to say. Fly on that wall. Yeah.
And of course, the VP of content certainly wouldn't know anything about different configuration settings for MFA, right?
That's right. Loving words ensued afterwards.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So I'm not an expert in MFA, and the blog did detail some of the methods that we saw that were being used. I think the most critical one that I want to call out is this the use of the Azure command line interface as being the sort of number one way that they were able to get in and bypass MFA. And I think that the takeaway that I want the audience to understand with this ROPC method, what's it called, remote. Sorry, I have to look it up because I don't even keep it in my brain. Resource owner password credentials, right? The thing that I want people to take away from this is that this ROPC method, it's not actually a form of authentication, it's impersonation. So when you're using OAuth and you're using this ROPC method, it's basically the application taking the user's credentials and then swapping them for tokens. And if there is no additional prompting over that, if it's just username and password, that token just gets issued, with basically the weakest link in that authentication chain, which is what this is. So the main thing is that ROPC can't support 2FA or MFA. It really just does very much like these sort of, deprecated methods like HTTP basic authentication. It's just looking at something the user knows and not something the user has or something the user is. It can't support the modern challenge response methods like with a FIDO2 key, YubiKey kind of thing. And really the best practice is to just, if you can, as quickly as possible, move away from using it. It is something that is a legacy problem that takes a little bit of energy and effort and engineering resources to change. If if you run a company that has a mobile app, for example, we see this ROPC method in a lot of mobile apps, for example, and it takes energy and effort to re-engineer your product so that it doesn't have that as the authentication method. And that is probably an important thing for you to start looking at now. The other thing to do is, as I mentioned earlier, basic security hygiene. rotate passwords, where you've seen these attacks happen, force a password reset and force a password with, complexity requirements that sort of, meet the 2026 standards of, hey, we all have password managers now. We're not writing them on Post-it notes and sticking them to the bottom of our keyboard. So let's use something long and complex that we don't have to actually, contrive out of our brain. We can just use a password manager to make a 64-character password that, it authenticates an application or some other tool that you're using. I hope that answered your question, Phyllis.
No, that's good. Thank you. And over to Brian.
Yeah, and Andrew, in my opinion, you don't really mince words about this. It kind of grinds my gears too, right? This entire campaign's successful and works because organizations, businesses, companies are still running on passwords that were stolen years ago and never rotated. It just makes my brain explode. So after decades of watching breach after breach, I'd argue credential hygiene is kind of the boring, unsexy failure point behind most of these headlines. Do you agree with that? And why do you think our industry, the MSP industry in particular, still struggles today to get clients to fix it?
Yeah, Brian, I was writing columns for PC World in the mid 2000s that talked about the problem of weak passwords. And here it is, 2026, and I'm talking about the problem of weak passwords. What is going on? Why have we not learned? I think the reality is that it's just too easy to rely on unsafe and weak authentication mechanisms. There's too many things that just allow us to do those things. We've been sort of, permitted to continue to function with inferior technology for too long. And I think, when we talk about deprecating services like this OAuth mechanism, it is deprecated in the sense that OAuth says you should not use this anymore. Can you still create something brand new today that uses ROPC 2.0? Yes, you can. That should not be something that we can allow people to do anymore. But there's no method of doing that. And so, I don't want to, I am reluctant to blame the end customers and people who are trying to just run a business, right? And their job is not networking and security. They are trying to make widgets or whatever it is that they're doing. But without having restrictions on how these sort of very, very vastly outdated mechanisms are used, I don't know that we can't really stop it other than to just practice the right, do good practices as a part of your business, right? If you're an MSP and you are trying to help your customers improve their security, you have to, it falls to all of us to make that case to every customer. And it probably gets repetitive and boring. And they're going to say, well, can't we just do it this way? It worked before.
Convenience, right? And complacency.
I think you're too. I think you're too nice, Spike.
I just believe in the power of persuasion.
Yeah, this is. I get there's technology. There's technologies process stuff, but this truly is a people problem. This is just like doing a crappy job of keeping your accounting books at this point. And I just think that seeing this stuff every day. There's a benefits enrollment site that I had to use the other day, and this is its complex password. It has to be 8 characters only. Can't be 9, can't be 7. Has to have 1 capital, 1 lowercase, minimum, and a number. And I'm like, it's just like this has got to the point where it's just kind of ridiculous. No one really should be excused for this. Now, I get these configurations, this legacy stuff. Does a small business owner even know that exists while they're running their company? No. But when it comes down to this credential security and all this kind of stuff, man, come on, man. It's just like you said back when you were writing, it was weak passwords. Hey, when my first job out of college, we had MFA in place for VPN. That was in the late 90s. So it just this stuff is just there's really no excuse, in my opinion, for people just having crap crap.
And what?
Yeah, but it's not just small companies, right? Even the very large bank that I do my banking with still does not allow me to use a TOTP authenticator app to like make an MFA. If it wants to send me an MFA, it has to have a cell phone number and sends it over SMS. And like that's the only MFA method that they allow. And here we are, it's 2026. Like, why can't I just pop my YubiKey in and have my bank recognize that that's in the laptop and authenticate me that way? So it's not that it's hard, but it takes commitment and security. I think a lot of businesses still call it a loss leader, right? Where they think that it's going to cost them money and not bring any revenue in. But the reality is, when you get breached, that's a huge cost that you could probably have avoided if you had better security. So,
yeah. Andrew, you bring up I love your last kind of rhetorical question about, the YubiKey. Why can't we just have these YubiKeys? And I'm going to kind of pose this to Brian as I hand him back the baton here. But Brian, a lot of these, let's just say we're dealing with a bank and a core banking application, or, some of these, systems that do have, some legacy authentication methods, and credit unions and others are prime for this. And is part of it that we're just still dealing with very antiquated code that sometimes can't support much newer types of authentication?
Yeah, it could be a variety of things, but legacy applications and legacy leadership, legacy thought process, the way we've always done it, and it's good enough, where to invest the money, all those things probably play a role, right? And but I've got to think, and this is what we do when we don't really know something. So I'll say it. It seems like it'd be simple or straightforward to me, but there could be a number of nuances that I just maybe I don't understand. But it seems like it would be fairly easy to add this auth layer, over the top, independent of the legacy stuff behind it.
Yeah, not to hate on banks too much, because I have bank customers and stuff, but coming from the banking world for a long time, it's just because they're cheap asses.
Well, right, but where are they going to allocate that capital?
I mean, they come down to a lot of banks have had to do this stuff a long time, and they did the MFA and they did that big lift, and it cost them a lot of money even to do that. And then to tell them, hey, they got to do, if the regulators aren't forcing them to do it, they're just not going to do it. I mean, that's just the reality, especially those bigger banks. Yeah, that's back to you, Brian.
Yeah. So Andrew, this isn't an isolated technique, right? We've watched these things like with evil tokens bypass MFA, kind of the same way, by abusing legitimate Microsoft auth flow instead of grabbing the passwords out, right? From where you sit at Huntress, do you think we're watching bad actors, methodically work their way through every non-interactive authentication path Microsoft offers, kind of like one at a time?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether AI is enabling this or whether they're just able to just Google it really well. But the reality is that adversaries are weaponizing new infrastructure at massive scale, and the speed at which they're able to weaponize that is increasing. And this is one example of where we see that, someone discovered something, and within a matter of hours to days, they were doing it at like industrial scale. The other piece of this is that we all suck at conditional access policies a little bit.
Yeah.
I am no, expert in this either. It does look like it's pretty complicated. I don't know whether that's, I don't want to point fingers at Microsoft for making something that's really complicated. They wanted to have, their customers have as much flexibility as possible to build these policies. But maybe we need to start thinking about building around some best practices with caps, so that we understand what the framework and the limitations are for a policy like this.
Andrew, to that context
of these different things.
Yeah, to that point, do you think that an MSP, is this a stop everything and make sure they're 100% certain their conditional access policies cover things like all all users, all cloud apps, all client app types? Is this a fix it, hang up from this call and go fix it today? Or is this kind of, we'll just schedule it for our next maintenance window kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I think given that this particular attack is ongoing, at least when it comes to certain kinds of accounts like Microsoft Entra, yeah, they probably it's probably time to, maybe use your little AI tool to build yourself some auditing and testing capabilities, and then deploy that into your environment with some test accounts to see if it actually does prevent the things that we're talking about.
Awesome. Last question I have for you, Andrew, and then I'll turn it over to Chris. But I've spent my career really, especially the last 10, 15 years, telling boards and leadership teams not to kind of overtrust a single data point, right? And I would consider IP geolocations kind of exhibit A of that. And some IPs in this campaign that you blogged and that we're talking about today, they geolocated China, others to Nebraska, right? So same campaign, wildly different, I'll say, attribution depending upon which tool you looked at. How much should defenders and MSPs actually be relying on IP geolocation for attribution?
IP geolocation, companies like MaxMind, they will say that their IP geolocation service for their high, the high end paying services that they have are 99% accurate. And I have no special insider knowledge to challenge that, but I do know that with the advent of IPv6, where as a test, when we were doing the research, when we discovered that this attack was ongoing, I created an account for myself I created a business and created an account with myself with Aaron, which is the registry of internet numbers and is the allocator of IPv6 address space. And for basically zero cost, you can get a /48 of IPv6 addresses, which is 256 addresses, once they validate your account. So I'm still waiting for them to finish validating my account. But then as soon as they have done that, I will get my 256 IP
you have
addresses.
To justify them, right? Rationalize them.
Yeah. And you have to use them right in a period of time, or they take them back. But if I wanted to, I could take these to one of these IP transit companies in China. I could take it to India. I could take it to the Netherlands, Germany, anywhere where there's these big data centers and businesses that provide this transiting service. And my IP address range is suddenly originating in the Netherlands or Germany or China or Japan or North Korea or South Korea. I don't know anybody who provides services for North Korea, but you know what I mean? Like the physical location of that IP address is a matter of a switch on which IP service company I'm using to host. And it can flip on a dime, because one of the things that we discovered in this attack was that once we informed Lishi that their customer that was Bring Your Own IP that was doing this attack was doing this, they kicked them off their service, and that customer took their IP range and took their football and went home and just went to a different field and started kicking it around. So, does that mean that they were, for a period of time, they were hosted on an IP range that originated in Hong Kong? Yes. Does it mean that they can also originate that IP range from Nebraska? Also, yes. It doesn't really matter where, the physical, at this point, what a IP geolocation means is so transitory and ephemeral. I don't know that we can rely on it for some of these small ranges that people can just get a hold of for no cost.
So do you think it would be prudent for us here, Andrew, to start a rumor that Berkshire Hathaway is in collusion with China on this scheme?
I am not going to start any internet rumors. Okay. But if you have proof and you want to start that rumor and you can bring the evidence to me, I'll take a look at it.
That's the journalist in him.
Yeah, I always looking for the the source here, Chris. That's what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting.
Bring me the evidence.
Yeah, about these providers. My question would be maybe provide the audience a little bit of background around these providers. You told me before we started here kind of what you learned about them, and they're not these big giant companies that have crazy infrastructure set up to kind of watch the traffic of these customers they provide. And at the same time, and the second part of that question is through this process, now that you learned more about these providers, do you and Huntress have a more refined process of being able to report these to these providers?
Yeah, well, so my philosophy with all of these things, whenever we discover threat activity coming from a network that belongs to a small ISP or a small company, I think that there's a tendency to just assume that they're bad actors and that they're just, running a bulletproof hosting service or something of that nature. But if it's a company that no one's ever heard of before, I like to give them the benefit of the doubt and actually go through the IP, the abuse reporting process. And we did that here. And this company was extremely responsive. So, whether or not it has a lasting effect is entirely, that's that company's responsibility to police their own space. If we don't ever hear from Lishy again, then we know that they have been doing a good job of policing their own space. If it comes up again and again, like some of the bulletproof hosts that we know are bad, and there are certain autonomous systems that we know are just basically bad neighborhoods on the internet. They market their services and their products to the criminal underground, and we know that the criminals take them up on that and they take advantage of that. We also know that there's some big legitimate ISPs and web hosting companies that just get taken advantage of because of the policies that they have for new customers. And, I don't want to blame them, because as soon as they find out that bad stuff is happening, they turn it off. But when you have policies that enable someone to engage in malicious activity for 24 to 48 hours, that's sometimes all the time they need to be able to accomplish their goals. They don't need to be hosted for weeks or months on end anymore. You can run a phishing campaign and get enough credentials within 24 hours before you get shut down for violating terms of service, and be successful. So what do you do as an MSP? It's hard to know who the good guys are, even when they're the big well-known companies who seem to be saying and doing all of the right things. I don't know that there's a great answer, other than it's everyone's responsibility to do the right thing and to take action as quickly as possible. And when it comes to larger internet providers, there's almost no excuse. They have to be monitoring their networks for malfeasance by their customers. They have to expect that's going to happen and take action quickly, hopefully before a company like Huntress has to report it to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the lesson here is don't assume that reporting will have zero outcome. This is a good example of where you didn't know these guys, you didn't know their size, didn't know their ownership, didn't know what they would do. But they did respond, and you went through the formal process and it worked. So it's probably, in this particular case, just listening to you, the fact that they were smaller, they seem to maybe even be more responsive than the bigger guys. Sometimes the bigger guys, they have a very bureaucratic process in place, and it can take days, if not weeks, to get stuff done.
Yeah, I mean, the hilarious thing about this company in particular was that, they have a CEO, CTO, and 2 network engineers that work for them, and then 2 support staff. But the 2 support staff that are on their company page are cats named Hui Hui and Guai Guai, and their pictures are literally on the staff page. So, sometimes you see stuff like that and you just assume the worst. Or sometimes you just, you find out that it's just this company has a sense of humor and that they put their pet cats on their, as their tech support people.
Well, I figured they're all related one way or another, so that's not surprising. So my next one would be Windows News reported on this, noted similar CLI targeting tactics that have already been against AWS and Google Cloud, their CLIs. For an MSP managing clients that use multiple clouds, is this not just a Microsoft problem, or is it pretty much you should assume every cloud or major cloud provider has this type of CLI capabilities / problem?
I think it's safe to assume it's weak unless you have proven otherwise. And so in this case, it's one of these don't trust, but verify. If you're using this kind of thing, you build out some kind of testing mechanism and you ensure that it's not just super easy to get around MFA by using the command line interface. I don't have any special knowledge of whether Google or AWS or any other big cloud provider, Nextcloud is vulnerable in the same way. I just want people to not assume it's safe until they've proven that it is, right? Yeah. By adversarially, banging on their own systems a little bit and making sure that stuff doesn't fall over.
Yeah, I've been a part of many incidents where somebody did a cloud migration and on the project plan, security was at the end. And so they got compromised well before those security tasks were supposed to be done. It didn't make any sense. And then they quickly, 2020 hindsight, so yeah, maybe we should have had security interwoven versus leaving it to the end.
Hey, it was on the list.
It's on the list. Yeah, at least we check the box. The auditor would be fine with it. Yeah, exactly. You and your team have seen credential spray volume increase 155 times over the last 6 months. It just seems like this is not something that you necessarily can't stop, but it's going to be something that you just have to, as an MSP, there's going to have to assume that this is just going to be a kind of constant type of attack activity that they're going to see. So
yeah, this is new. This is the new version of the sort of internet background radiation that everyone talks about, where we still see configure attacks, targeting firewalls and things. It doesn't mean that like anyone's going to get hit with it. But yes, if every MSP assumes that these attacks are happening and they are happening constantly and that they are happening relentlessly and without pause, that should be enough understanding of why they need to do the testing they need to do, why they need to validate that their security controls are functioning. And what we're going to be watching for in the coming months, now that we're aware of this, is the mean time to compromise. That from the time an account comes online till the time it becomes compromised is an indicator of the effectiveness of controls, but also the volume and techniques that are being used to try to compromise those accounts. We'll be keeping an eye on that to see if that changes over time, because at this point, it's just now it's out in the open. Everyone is aware that this is a method that people can use, and I'm sure that threat actors have no qualms with just experimenting with new things, and they will be trying a different thing that no one has thought of next for the next type of attacks. And we're just going to keep an eye out for those and respond to them as we see them.
All right. And here's your last question that you get as a guest on this amazing program. Give the MSPs out there one action that they should take after they leave this.
Yeah, I would like every MSP that's watching this to please review all of your conditional access policies. Please look for the indications that will be in your logs of caps that were bypassed, or caps that or accounts that were logged into at off business hours. Again, this is your conventional security hygiene stuff that just needs to get done, right? We need to look both ways before we cross the street, wash our hands after we use the bathroom, and check our caps to make sure that nothing is getting through at 3 a.m. when no one's at the office on the 4th of July.
Thank you very much. I think we'd all agree that's what they should do.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks.
Appreciate your questions, Chris.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you for coming on. You were fantastic. We'd love to get you back. It was just, man, really succinct. Great job. You can tell you're awesome at what you do. And I think the journalism background certainly lends itself there for you. Really cool stuff. For those out there that joined us, thanks so much for, coming back from the holiday. I hope you had a safe, healthy 4th of July. Phyllis, as always, thanks for joining us, Brian and Chris. Everybody have a fantastic week, and we'll look forward to seeing you this time next Monday. Again, Andrew, thanks a million. Take care.
If you're in the Write a Boom community but not in our Discord yet, you're missing where the real conversation happens. Join community.writeaboom.com to access cybercall discussions, upcoming CTFs, boom camps, and early access to what's coming next. If you want to stay close to what's actually happening in the MSP security space, I'll see you there.